I want to talk briefly about some of the problems that you might have with sampling and how we can possibly minimize those problems. So one problem that you might have is sampling variability or sampling error. And we talked about this before. We want low variability. Different samples are giving us different results, which we expect. We want to make sure that those differences are as low as possible. So we want to use a sampling method that will give us those same results. If we don't plan our sampling methods properly, you're going to basically invite bias into your results, and the more bias, the more flawed your results and the less useful they actually are. So you want to make sure that you're designing your experiment or designing your survey or study in a way where the sampling variability will not be out of control. One error we might encounter is the voluntary response bias. So if a large group of individuals are all asked to respond to a survey, and then we only count the people, obviously, who respond, this is voluntary response bias. And the reason for that is typically only people with very strong feelings one way or the other will actually respond to the survey. So one example that I like to use is that each term you get about 1 million emails from Bellevue University that ask you to talk about your professor and how much you love or hate him or her. So either students who really think that I'm awesome or students who really think that I'm the worst person in the world, those are the people that respond to those emails. They have very strong opinions one way or the other, whereas people in the middle generally don't take the time. So that creates a bad sampling frame because we have this response bias. We're only talking to people who are very opinionated one way or the other. With a presidential election, same thing. Only people who are very opinionated about a specific candidate or about a specific cause are going to actually take the time to respond to that survey. So that is voluntary response bias because only people who want to answer. Convenience sampling is very biased. Essentially, we just include results from people who are convenient for us. So for instance, I teach classes at Bellevue University. If I wanted to talk about a specific survey and I only talk to the people that I see in my residential classes, well, that's great, but is that going to give me a representative sample? Well, it completely depends on what question I'm asking. So for instance, asking your Facebook friends about their political views would likely be biased toward what your own political views are, because a lot of times people stick together, not always. But basically convenience samples are based on being easy to gather that data. A bad sampling frame is when we're not including all of the types of people in the population in the sampling frame. So again, we talked before about this. We commonly miss people who are in prison, who are homeless, who are students, who are military stationed overseas. These people are sometimes difficult to include or get a hold of because their addresses are not on file or are always changing, or perhaps they have a couple of different addresses. Students and military personnel, quite often, that is the situation. So that is a bad sampling frame if we're not including those people, assuming those are part of the population that we're studying. Undercoverage occurs when a subset of the population is kind of left out or underrepresented. For instance, if you did an evening telephone survey, you would miss those people who are, say, restaurant employees, or people who work the third shift, or people who go out to dinner all of the time, because they wouldn't be home to answer that call. Now with cell phones, of course, that's a little bit different, but again, those people at work still probably are not going to stop in the middle of their shift to answer your questions for you. Door-to-door surveys during the day often talk to those people who have a parent staying at home taking care of children, or people who work from home. And so all of the people who are working during the day and are not at home will be missed in those door-to-door surveys. Surveys given in English would limit responses from people who don't speak English. So that would be undercoverage because you're leaving out a part of the population. Non-response bias occurs when people are given the opportunity to respond but don't. So again, it's better to ensure that a smaller group of subjects responds to a survey than to put the survey out to a large number and only receive a small amount. Causes of non-response, I've done this before. Boredom, you have a very long drawn out survey. I've been halfway through a survey and just hung up on the poor person, and I felt bad, but there's only so much time that you can give to someone asking you stupid questions. Response bias, questions are made to influence your response, and questions asked for information people are not willing to give, like your social security number, your weight, your income, your age, etc. So these are all possible reasons for a non-response bias. An example of a response bias is when our question is written to give us a certain response. So for instance, Kobe Bryant makes more money in a single year than all of the professors at Bellevue University combined. Do you believe Kobe Bryant is overpaid or underpaid? Well, obviously I've written this question to make you feel bad for me and the little amount of money that I make as compared to Kobe Bryant. And therefore I would say, well, of course, Kobe Bryant is overpaid. He makes way too much. However, if I rewrite that question and I say, Kobe Bryant is responsible for bringing in over $1 billion to the organizations he works for. However, he only keeps 3% of this money. Do you feel Kobe Bryant is overpaid or underpaid? Oh, well, he's such a good person that he's only keeping 3%, so clearly he's underpaid. So notice how those questions being written in a certain way make you want to respond in a certain way. So how to think about bias, or how to basically avoid it, is make sure that you're aware of it. So look for the bias in any survey that you encounter. That's any of the biases that we've talked about. If you're creating the survey, spend time looking for the biases before you take the survey. Quite often when people are doing this in real life, when they're actually doing a survey, they will take a small pilot survey where basically they're looking at a small group and then look for any misunderstandings, misinterpretations, confusion, etc. And then always report the sampling method in detail. So if you're actually doing a survey, you should talk about the sampling method so that others may replicate your sampling survey and hopefully your results.